Narratives. What are they? What do they do? Well, narratives not only shape our English advanced class, but the world around us. They shape our world by influencing how we understand ourselves, others, and the societies we live in. They're stories we tell through media, history, culture, and personal experiences. Narratives attempt to frame our understanding of concepts like power, justice, success, and belonging. They also influence whose voices are heard and whose are silenced, reinforcing or challenging dominant ideologies. In a rapidly changing world, narratives shape public opinion, fuel social movements, and impact global decisions. By shaping perception, narratives ultimately shape reality. The narratives that shape our world often reflect cultural ideals, and one of the most influential is the American dream. The American dream, while often celebrated as a universal path to success through hard work and perseverance, has historically not favoured women. The American dream is one of the most influential narratives shaping the modern world. It promotes the idea that success is available to anyone through hard work, determination, and individual merit. This story has shaped cultural values, not only in the United States, but globally, reinforcing ideas of freedom and personal responsibility. However, it often ignores barriers such as gender, race, and class, things that affect people's ability to access opportunity. Narratives like the American dream play a powerful role in shaping how we understand our place in the world. It sets gendered expectations around success, identity, and value. At its core, the American dream idolizes the self-made man, a hard-working individual who rises from nothing to achieve prosperity, ownership, and freedom.
Let's talk about the feminist lens. Ugh, I know, right? Harper and Izabelle at it again with their feminist garbage. But here's the thing. Looking at the narratives that shape our world through a feminist lens isn't about hating men. It's about asking who gets included in the story and who gets left out. As two intelligent and angry teenage girls, it's beyond frustrating how often people dismiss these critical perspectives as whining or oversensitivity, when it's actually about calling out deep-rooted injustice in these narratives we're forced to study. If that's garbage, then maybe it's time to start listening, because ignoring it only lets the injustice continue. So what's the big picture anyway? Let's talk about it. Narratives both construct and reflect cultural views. So what are ours? Equality, justice, critical awareness? We believe in challenging traditional power structures that marginalise women, advocating for inclusivity and respect, right? Rooted in patriarchal ideals, the narrative of the American dream traditionally centres on the male breadwinner and the nuclear family, casting women in supporting domestic roles rather than as independent achievers. In the 1950s, for example, the American dream told women their highest purpose was to marry young, raise children, and maintain a spotless home, while their husband pursued careers and financial success. Even today, the narrative remains. Women are still expected to have it all, but are rarely given the same tools or recognition to do so. On that note, let's talk about narratives influencing our modern society. The narratives that shape our world have played a powerful role in shaping harmful ideologies like tradwife culture and incel culture, by reinforcing patriarchal stereotypes and toxic understandings of identity and power. Both of these subcultures are deeply influenced by regressive narratives about gender roles, stories that idealize a past where men were dominant providers and women were submissive homemakers.
Pleasantville, directed by Gary Ross, is a strong example of a text that is highly effective in portraying the limitations placed on women within the traditional American dream. This film reflects and critiques cultural values through a distinctly feminist lens, exposing how 1950s ideals, especially those rooted in the American dream, were built on the oppression and silencing of women. Ross clearly intended to use this film as a critique on conformity and the repressive ideals of the so-called perfect past. Pleasantville uses a range of cinematic techniques to reinforce its themes, the most obvious being colour. The shift from black to white to colour is more than just a stylistic choice. It's a powerful metaphor for awakening transformation and resisting against rigid, patriarchal and segregational structures. Driving further into a feminist lens, in the beginning of the film, the world of Pleasantville is entirely black and white, symbolising the repression, control and conformity of 1950s gender roles. Women in particular are shown living within strict limitations, expected to cook, clean, smile and remain emotionally passive. As female characters begin to question their roles and assert their independence, they literally begin to appear in colour. Betty Parker's transformation is especially significant. Once a traditional housewife, she starts to explore her desires and express her thoughts. When she finally appears in full colour, it visually represents her stepping outside the boundaries society has set for her. Ross uses this transition to critique how the American dream excludes women's real desires and experiences. The arrival of colour is met with fear and backlash from male authority figures, symbolising society's resistance to female empowerment and change.
In contrast to Pleasantville's critique of traditional gender roles, the film American Psycho presents a darker, more brutal commentary on toxic masculinity and the mistreatment of women. In American Psycho, director Mary Harron's intention was to critique toxic masculinity, consumerism, and the dark side of the American dream, particularly through a feminist lens. By adapting Bret Easton Ellis's novel, Harron flips the story from a glorification of male violence to a satirical deconstruction of it. Harron attempts to portray women through Patrick Bateman's point of view, emphasising how he sees them as not people but as objects to be used, controlled, and discarded. This is reinforced by the cold, detached cinematography where women are filmed with their bodies reduced to parts and their voices ignored or talked over. It mirrors Bateman's disturbing gaze, forcing the audience to confront his dehumanizing mindset. Some audiences have often misinterpreted the film as a glorification of Bateman's lifestyle, rather than the brutal satire it truly is. Why is this relevant, you may ask? Well, this misunderstanding reveals a deeper issue, that when texts critique patriarchal systems, they are often flattened or misinterpreted because of the mainstream culture and how it struggles to accept feminist perspectives.
Let's circle back to Betty Parker. A scene that clearly exposes the sexist and misogynistic foundations of its town's values is when Betty's husband George comes home to find dinner not on the table and the house empty. Confused and helpless, he wanders around muttering, "Where's my dinner?" as if the absence of food is an existential crisis. This scene reflects the deeply ingrained belief that a woman's worth solely lies in her ability to serve her husband. Ross uses this moment to satirize traditional gender roles by showing how absurd and fragile male identity is when it's built on control and dependency.
A powerful contrasting scene in American Psycho is when Patrick Bateman films himself having sex with two women, watching himself in the mirror. In Pleasantville, the power imbalance is disguised under politeness and tradition. George's confusion and distress when Betty fails to have dinner ready reveals the deep-rooted expectation that a woman's role is to serve and be emotionally available to her husband. In contrast, this scene in American Psycho is a hyper-violent, modern take of the same entitlement. Through framing and mise-en-scene, Harron positions the camera to show Bateman flexing and admiring himself in the mirror, while the women, reduced to anonymous bodies, exist purely for his consumption and control. In contrast with Pleasantville, American Psycho shows a world where the American dream has evolved into hyper-masculine capitalism.
So, are these texts effective commentaries? Absolutely. These films are both constructions and reflections of cultural views. Pleasantville and American Psycho use very different styles, but both powerfully deconstruct the myths of the American dream through a feminist lens.